very unstable at the moment. I think they're taking note of the calls for freedoms, for dignity, for justice that are emanating from the Arab world. They're playing catch-up, but they've played catch-up rather well in the last few days, and this suggests that there is a mental as well as an institutional and policy turnaround by the international community. And this, in my humble view, could be extended to a number of other countries in the region and to the world at large. We're seeing the return of the broader agenda for human rights, governance, democratization, all of these things which just a few months ago we had written the obituary of and gave up on, especially in a region known for having autocrats who ruled with impunity, and in the case of Libya, I would say, save for Saddam Hussein, this is possibly the worst dictator and violator of human rights in the last 40 years.
Azzeddine Sharif, are you satisfied with what you've been hearing from the international community over the last couple of days? And do you feel that that will be enough to eventually topple Gaddafi from power?
I would just draw a picture of the situation. Number one, that the share of the blame of what we see now actually between the international community and Libya. The Libyan regime was on the top list of the terrorist, on the top of the terrorist list in the Europeans and the United Nations. But it's been accepted and welcomed again, brought from the cold, and because of the compensations and the new deals. Also the collapse of the economy in Europe and around the world. We have seen the European leaders went and sat by Gaddafi in his tent begging for oil deals and investment, and also to sell him weapons, to train his security army. All these things, I would say that they share the blame. Both the European leaders and the Libyan regime. Not just this, that the Libyan people suffered all these decades under Gaddafi, and the laws which is implemented by Gaddafi against the Libyan people, which is absolutely crash, or they don't go with the international law, also the human rights conventions, and we have campaigned since 2006 to raise awareness here in the UK, writing to MPs, writing to the previous government, and try to bring the attention to them. And we have received an answer from Gerard Kaufman. Gerard Kaufman, my MP, he wrote to us in response of our question, why and how can Britain make deals with a dictator like Gaddafi? And his response was, if we don't make deals with dictators like Gaddafi, we are not going to have business with anyone. So it is clearly, now it is a new era. It is the people's era. And it's the revolution, and the people will take over, and the West, they have to respect their decision, and they have to respect their own determination. In Libya, they are very worried. The Libyan people very awake not to be hijacked, or their revolution to be hijacked by the West, and then they send an army to put, that they want to support the Libyans and safeguard them, and then they will stay there forever, like what we see in Iraq, what we see in other regions in the world. We want to make sure that the international community, the UN, the European, the EU,
Peggy,
and the whole world.
Peggy Hicks, if I could just
Yes.
turn back to you for a moment on this. Is there a sense here that certain Western nations basically got their fingers burned here for spending too much time cozying up to Gaddafi's regime, and that this is really the only reason that they're acting now?
Well, I think the point obviously does come following directly on Mubarak's fall in Egypt. I mean, that you can't separate the two in that way. And in that case, of course, there was, incredible concern over the fact that this person who had been had so much support from allies like the U.S., military aid as well. That decision, now that the people were rising up in a different direction, looked very short-sighted. Gaddafi, I think, is a somewhat different case in that there obviously was less of that sort of cozy relationship. But I think your speaker is absolutely right that there are those who were trying to do deals and move things forward. And I think this does show that those types of short-term calculations of what's good business may not make sense in a longer-term reality where it increases instability and violates people's rights, and we absolutely have to stand by the people.
Sorry to interrupt, but if events in Libya, events inside Libya essentially die down and we reach some sort of a stalemate there, and it's not at the top of the headlines every day as it has been for the last week or so, are you confident that the diplomats in Geneva will follow through on what they've been saying?
Yeah, I think the tide on this one has turned very substantially. And I do think that there will be follow-through. It's a question, of course, how effective some of that will be, but I think that the tools that are in place, the asset freezes, as I mentioned, the arms embargoes, the travel bans, the possibility of the ICC engaging in a very substantial way. And remember, the Human Rights Council itself put in place a commission of inquiry to investigate the abuses that are occurring as well. These are all measures that we've seen time and time again actually do have an impact, maybe not immediately, but over time.
Tariq Youssef, I saw you nodding in agreement to some of what you heard just there. Do you want to respond?
Absolutely. I think the tide has definitely turned. You can no longer hide what's happening in your country, notwithstanding whatever efforts that are being made to kind of conceal and create confusion. All the images, videos, interviews, information coming out of Libya suggest that the international community will be watching and that the warnings and threats expressed today will be taken rather seriously. I would also go further and say that we're not only waiting for the Human Rights Council to move. I think Western powers, led by the US, precisely the countries that have accommodated Gaddafi in the last 7 or 8 years during a period of normalization, are acting out of a sense of guilt and have plenty of interest to ensure that the transition for him out of the country will be as smooth as possible and will be as least damaging and unstable as possible. This suggests that even beyond the human rights issues, there are growing efforts and perhaps steps being taken to ensure that Gaddafi is barricaded inside of the AlJazeera army barracks where he is located right now, and that members of the regime, the inner circle around him, are being contacted with pressures and perhaps also incentives to persuade them to not launch the counterattacks and not engage in further bloodshed. So human rights issues, global geostrategic issues, oil issues, all of these make Libya especially important. And the international community, I think, is going to be deploying all the instruments it has at its disposal, both unilaterally and multilaterally.